September 15, 1916. The Somme. A British infantryman crouched in a trench covered in blood and mud watches something emerge from the morning fog that shouldn't exist. It's metal, it's massive, and it's moving toward the German lines like a prehistoric beast crawling out of hell itself. He laughs, because what else do you do when you've lost your mind? But then the machine guns open up. Hundreds of rounds per minute slam into the thing's armor. And it just keeps coming. This is the story of the first tank battle in history. The day warfare changed forever. And the iron monster that made men question everything they thought they knew about death. The Western Front, 1916. 2 years into the Great War, and the world has descended into a nightmare no one predicted. Trench warfare has transformed Europe into a graveyard stretching from the English Channel to Switzerland. Barbed wire, artillery craters, poison gas, machine gun nests that can cut down 1,000 men before breakfast. The Battle of the Somme, already the bloodiest conflict in human history, has been raging since July. On the first day alone, the British suffered 60,000 casualties. 60,000, in a single morning. Young men who climbed out of their trenches believing their officers, believing the artillery barrage had done its job, believing they'd walk across no man's land and occupy abandoned German positions. They were wrong. The Germans were waiting. Their machine gunners survived in deep bunkers, and when the whistles blew, they emerged and opened fire. Row after row of British soldiers fell. Some units lost 90% of their men before crossing 50 yards. By September, the British High Command is desperate. They need something, anything, to break the stalemate. They need a weapon that can cross no man's land, crush barbed wire, survive machine gun fire, and terror the enemy into submission. They need a miracle. What they get is a machine that looks like a water tank mounted on tractor treads. The soldiers call it the tank, because that's what the British told factory workers they were building, mobile water tanks, to keep the project secret. But there's nothing secret about what's about to happen at Flers-Courcelette. Rewind to 1915. While men die by the thousands in French mud, a small group of engineers and military visionaries are working on something radical in Britain. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, is one of the driving forces. He sees what others don't, that this war cannot be won by men alone. Not against machine guns, not against modern artillery. The concept is simple but revolutionary. An armored vehicle that can move across broken ground, crush obstacles, and shield its crew from bullets. But making it reality? That's another story. The Mark I tank is a 30-ton steel beast, 26 feet long, shaped like a rhombus with treads wrapped around its entire hull. It carries either 2 6-pound guns or multiple machine guns, and requires a crew of 8 men to operate. 8 men packed into a hot, deafening metal coffin filled with engine fumes and the stench of oil. The crew sits inside a space so cramped they can barely move. The commander stands in the center with a tiny vision slit to see through. The driver sits up front, steering with levers that require the strength of an ox to operate. The gearsmen work in pairs, one on each side, coordinating gear changes with hand signals because the engine noise makes communication impossible. The gunners man the weapons, and everyone breathes air so toxic that men regularly pass out from carbon monoxide poisoning. There's no suspension system. Every bump, every shell crater, every trench wall sends violent shocks through the crew's bodies. Men leave missions with broken bones from being thrown against the interior. Some vomit continuously from the heat and motion sickness. Others develop permanent hearing damage from the engine roar. And the armor? 3/4-inch steel plates. Enough to stop rifle rounds and machine gun bullets. But not artillery. A direct hit from a German field gun turns the tank into a crematorium. The British test these machines in secret. The crews train in the English countryside, learning to navigate trenches and obstacles. But nothing, absolutely nothing, can prepare them for combat, because in September 1916, they're about to roll into hell. September 15th, dawn breaks over the Somme with that same gray, lifeless quality that's defined this war. The British have assembled 49 tanks for this offensive. 49, that's every operational tank in existence. But here's the problem. Only 32 make it to the starting line. 17 break down before the battle even begins. Mechanical failures, ditched in craters, tracks thrown. The Mark I is barely combat ready, plagued with reliability issues that would make modern engineers weep. The infantry watches these metal monsters approach the front line with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Some men cheer, others shake their heads. Veterans who've seen every miracle weapon promised by headquarters fail spectacularly don't get their hopes up. They've heard about poison gas that would win the war, about artillery barrages that would destroy every German position, about strategic brilliance from generals who've never set foot in a trench. Why would this be different? One soldier will later write, "When I first saw the tank, I thought someone had gone mad. It looked like a garden shed on wheels, creeping along at walking pace. I couldn't imagine how something that's slow and loud would survive 5 minutes under fire." He's about to find out. The plan is for the tanks to advance ahead of the infantry, crushing wire and suppressing enemy positions. The foot soldiers will follow in the tanks' wake, occupying the territory. Simple, clean, like everything else the general's plan that turns into a bloodbath. At 6:20 a.m., the artillery barrage begins. Thousands of shells scream overhead, pounding German positions. The ground shakes. The air fills with smoke and the chemical stink of high explosives. This is normal. This is every day on the Somme. But then the tanks start moving. Slowly, painfully slowly, 4 miles per hour at best. The crews inside are already fighting just to keep the machines operational. The commanders peer through narrow vision slits, trying to navigate terrain they can barely see. The drivers wrestle with steering levers that fight back like living things. The gearsmen coordinate their movements, muscles screaming as they force the transmission to respond. And they roll forward into no man's land. The German soldiers see them first. Shapes emerging from the smoke. Low, dark, moving wrong. Not men, not horses, something else. At first, they don't believe their eyes. The shapes keep coming, closer. The morning light catches the steel plating and suddenly German soldiers are staring at machines that shouldn't exist. Monsters from an industrial nightmare, grinding toward their trenches with mechanical inevitability. Panic spreads like fire. The machine gunners open up. Standard protocol, suppressing fire, but the bullets spark off the armor and ricochet into the dirt. The tanks don't slow down. They don't stop. They don't even seem to notice. One German soldier will later describe it as the most terrifying thing I ever witnessed. We shot at it with everything we had. The bullets just bounced off. It kept coming like the devil himself was driving it. A Mark I tank, designated D-17, approaches the village of Flers. Its commander, Captain Harold Mortimer, peers through his vision slit at the carnage ahead. German trenches, wire obstacles, machine gun positions, everything that's killed millions of men over the past 2 years. He gives the order to advance. D-17 reaches the barbed wire first. The wire that stopped countless infantry charges. The wiremen have died tangled in by the thousands, caught in the open while machine guns cut them down. The wire that represents the entire logic of trench warfare. The tank rolls over it like it's grass. 30 tons of steel simply crushes the wire into the ground. The treads chew it up and spit it out behind. What took engineers hours to emplace, what men died by the dozen trying to cut through, disappears beneath the tank's advance in seconds. The German machine gunners intensify their fire. Desperate now, but the armor holds. Inside, the crew can hear the constant metallic hammering of bullets against the hull. Like being inside a bell tower during a storm. The noise is maddening, but they're alive. D-17 approaches a German trench. The defenders watch in horror as this metal beast positions itself perpendicular to their position and simply tips forward. The front of the tank drops into the trench. For a moment, it seems stuck, the nose pointing down into the excavation. The Germans allow themselves hope. Then the tracks catch, the engine roars, and the tank climbs out the other side like a beetle scaling a twig. It's rolling through their defensive line, through the one thing that's kept them safe for 2 years. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. Behind D-17, British infantry advance. They're not charging into machine gun fire. They're not dying in heaps in the wire. They're walking forward, almost casually, following in the tank's path. The German soldiers break, first in 1s and 2s, then entire sections, then whole units. They abandon their positions and retreat. Some throw down their weapons. Others run with their hands up. Veterans who've held their ground against overwhelming odds, who've survived artillery barrages and gas attacks and infantry charges, they run from the tank. D-17 enters Flers village at approximately 8:30 a.m. A British spotter aircraft flying overhead sends a message that will become legendary. Tank seen in main street of Flers with large number of troops following it. That single sentence represents the end of one kind of warfare and the beginning of another. But let's be clear, this isn't a decisive victory. It's not even close. Of the 32 tanks that started the battle, only 9 make it to their objectives. 9. The rest break down, get stuck in shell craters, throw their tracks, or suffer mechanical failures. Some simply stop working in the middle of no man's land, their crews forced to abandon them under fire. Several tanks are knocked out by German artillery, direct hits that turn the interior into an inferno. The crews don't have much chance to escape. Those who do survive often suffer horrific burns. The heat inside operational tanks becomes unbearable. Men pass out. Some have to be dragged from the vehicles unconscious. Others vomit continuously from the fumes and motion. Tank crews will suffer some of the highest casualty rates of any combat arm in the British military. And the tanks that do succeed, they can only operate for short periods. They're too slow to exploit breakthroughs, too unreliable to sustain offensive operations, too mechanically primitive to be the war-winning weapon the generals hoped for. The Battle of Flers-Courcelette continues for days after the tank attack. The British gain some ground, about a mile at the deepest point. They capture several villages and a few thousand German prisoners, but it's nothing like the breakthrough promised. The Western Front remains deadlocked. So why does this matter? Because on September 15, 1916, warfare changed in a way that could never be undone. The tank proved that machine guns and barbed wire weren't invincible, that the stalemate could be broken, that technology could overcome the defensive advantage that had turned Europe into a slaughterhouse. The Germans see this immediately. Their after-action reports speak with unusual alarm about the psychological impact of the tanks. Soldiers who held their ground against massed infantry charges broke and ran when facing these machines. The moral effect was out of all proportion to the physical damage inflicted. Within months, Germany begins developing their own tanks. France accelerates their existing programs. Every major military power starts investing in armored warfare. The age of the tank has begun. The Mark I is just the beginning. The British learn from Flers-Courcelette and improve the design. The Mark IV tank, introduced in 1917, is more reliable and better armored. The Mark V has a better transmission, allowing a single driver to control the vehicle instead of requiring a commander and 2 gearsmen. By 1917, tanks are being used in larger formations. Hundreds of them. At the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917, the British deploy 476 tanks in a concentrated assault. They achieve a breakthrough of 5 miles in a single day, an unthinkable advance by Western Front standards. For a moment, it looks like the war might actually end. But the tanks still can't exploit the breakthrough. They're too slow, too short-ranged, too mechanically fragile. The Germans counterattack and retake most of the lost ground. Still, the principle is proven. Tanks can break through fortified positions. They can survive machine gun fire. They can cross obstacles. They just need to be faster, more reliable, and used in greater numbers. By 1918, the British have learned to coordinate tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft in combined arms operations. The German spring offensive of 1918 nearly breaks the Allied lines, but the British counterattack in August, the 100 Days Offensive, uses tanks as a key component. Over 600 tanks participate in the initial assault at Amiens. The German lines crumble. Germany's General Ludendorff will call August 8, 1918, the Black Day of the German Army. Demoralized by tanks, unable to stop the Allied advance, German forces begin retreating. 3 months later, the war ends. The soldiers who laughed at the tanks in September 1916 stopped laughing fast. Those who survived the war understood they'd witnessed something historic, a pivot point, the moment when industrial warfare evolved beyond trenches and barbed wire into something more mobile, more mechanized, more modern. The tank crews themselves, they were pioneers in the truest sense. Men who volunteered to operate machines that were as likely to kill them as protect them. Who endured heat, fumes, noise, and violence in a steel coffin just to prove that armored warfare could work. Their casualty rates were horrific. Tank crews suffered from exposure to carbon monoxide, heat stroke, and the constant battering of the vehicle's movement. Many developed lifelong health problems. Some went deaf. Others suffered psychological trauma from the claustrophobic conditions and the knowledge that a single artillery shell could turn their tank into their tomb. But they persevered. They refined their tactics. They learned how to navigate trenches, coordinate with infantry, identify targets through limited vision slits, and keep their machines running despite mechanical failures that would have made civilian drivers give up. By the end of World War I, over 2,500 tanks had been deployed by the Allies. The Germans, starting late, only produced 20 of their own A7 Volts tanks, though they captured and used many Allied vehicles. The lessons learned at Flers-Courcelette would shape the next war. German military theorists like Heinz Guderian studied the tank battles of 1917–1918 and developed the concept of blitzkrieg, rapid, concentrated armored assaults supported by air power. The panzer divisions that tore through Europe in 1939–1940 were the direct descendants of that first Mark I that rolled through Flers. The Soviets built massive tank armies that would eventually crush the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. The Americans developed the Sherman tank, reliable, mass-produced, and good enough to win the war through sheer numbers. The British created faster, more lethal designs like the Crusader and Churchill. Every tank that's ever rolled off a production line, from World War II Shermans to modern M1 Abrams, owes its existence to what happened on September 15, 1916. There's a photograph taken sometime after the Battle of Flers-Courcelette. It shows a Mark I tank ditched in a shell crater, abandoned after breaking down. The crew is long gone. British soldiers walk past it without giving it much attention. Just another piece of wrecked equipment in a landscape full of wreckage. But look closer at that image and you're seeing the future. You're seeing the end of cavalry charges and linear tactics. You're seeing the beginning of mechanized warfare, of armored divisions, of the combined arms doctrine that still dominates military thinking today. The soldiers who laughed at that first tank were wrong, but they can be forgiven, because they were living in one age of warfare while watching another being born. They'd spent 2 years in trenches, watching men die in ways that seemed to defy all logic and mercy. They'd seen every miracle weapon fail. How could they know this one would work? The tank at Flers didn't win the Battle of the Somme. It didn't end the war. It didn't even achieve all its tactical objectives. But it proved something more important than any single victory. It proved that the stalemate could be broken. That defense didn't always have the advantage. That the machine gun and barbed wire weren't the final word in warfare. It proved that warfare evolves. And in the smoking ruins of Flers village, watching that 30-ton steel monster roll past with British infantry in its wake, the German soldiers understood something their commanders would take months to accept. The age of the trench was over. The age of the tank had begun. And nothing, not courage, not determination, not even the strongest defensive positions, would ever be quite the same again.